All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I wanted to make a video about the New York Pro that happened yesterday, specifically the competitor that I feel was overlooked the most. And I think that was Maxx Charles. Maxx Charles, I was looking back at some of the HD pictures on NPC News Online. I watched the finals and I watched the prejudging and I watched them twice. I rewatched the live stream to really get a good look at these guys again. And after looking back at those and looking at the HD pictures, I honestly think that out of all the guys, conditioning-wise, I think that Maxx had the best conditioning by far. He was grainy, he was hard, he had striations all throughout his chest, his shoulders were striated, he had vascularity all throughout his upper body. And this is really the only placing that I really disagreed with. I would definitely have had Maxx placing higher. I would have liked to see him in that top 4 call out at prejudging for sure. And I'd have liked to see him in the comparisons for the top 3 against guys like Ian and Justin and John. Because I think conditioning wise, he had arguably better condition than all 3 of those guys. Now, I don't disagree with Ian winning the show. It is a bodybuilding show after all. And at the end of the day, Ian was the biggest guy. He was the most muscular guy. And he had decent conditioning. Not great conditioning, but it was decent. And being the biggest guy with decent conditioning, I think he did deserve the win. So unlike a lot of people, I've seen a lot of comments criticizing Ian in the past videos. I don't actually disagree with Ian winning. I wouldn't have Maxx winning the show because obviously there is the weak point of Maxx Charles. We have to acknowledge that he does lack in the lower body department. But that being said, I do feel that Maxx was overlooked here, and here's why I feel that way. Even though Maxx, his lower body is lacking compared to his upper body, when he's in good shape like this, great shape like this, I should say, his lower body is so separated and conditioned, it almost makes up for the lack of size. He's got that crazy separation in his legs. He's got the vascularity in his hamstrings and his glutes, and I think that makes up for the lack of size to an extent. And I honestly would have really liked to see him in the callouts for the top 3. And I saw Milos Sarshev, who apparently coached him for this show, posted some pictures of Maxx right before the show, and he looked insane. And obviously I know it only matters what you look like on stage, but these pictures in the hotel room before getting on stage just show how good of shape Maxx really was in. I think the stage lighting was a little bit of a washout lighting type of situation. And honestly, I don't think the conditioning showed as good as it did in these hotel room pictures, and that's why I wanted to show them to you guys here because I think you can really get an idea of how grainy, how separated, how detailed Maxx Charles was. And I really don't see why he didn't place higher here. And like I said, at the end of the day, there's really nothing you can do about it. I mean, the judges picked who the judges picked, and you can't really argue with that. But I would have just really liked to see Maxx, just on the merit of his conditioning, get into those better callouts. I was really surprised watching prejudging to see that Maxx wasn't in that top 4 with John, Ian, Justin, and Patrick. Patrick was actually in the top 4 callout at prejudging, but then at the night show, he ended up placing 6th. So that whole, the judging at the prejudging really threw me off, just the way they did it compared to how they did it at the night show. The callouts were really completely different between prejudging and the night show, so that kind of threw me too. But really the only placing that I disagreed with was Maxx's. And I think if you put him in a call out with those top guys, you would have seen how good his conditioning was compared to him. If you compare 1st and 5th, Ian won the show, Maxx got 5th. Just compare one pose here, the front double bicep. It's called the front double bicep for a reason. The biceps are the primary body part being focused on in this pose. And who has the better biceps there? Maxx. Who has the better conditioning? The midsection, the ab separation. Almost every detail of that front double bicep, Maxx looked superior conditioning-wise and almost from a structure standpoint to Ian. Now, granted, Ian has much better legs than Maxx, and I still would have Ian beating Maxx at the end of the day. But my point just is, if they would have put him in those call-outs, I think his conditioning would have really shined next to these guys because I do think he was much more conditioned than Ian. I think he was much more conditioned than John. Justin was in fantastic shape, and I'm actually happy to see him in 2nd place. And like I said, I was kind of waiting to see the HD pictures here because the video is one thing, but you really get kind of a crystal clear look when you get these high-res pictures. So when I saw these pictures, I wanted to make this video because you definitely can see, like, take this most muscular shot, for example. Looking at that in HD, you can see every detail, every fiber, every striation. Maxx was in incredible shape here. And I just can't help but feel like he got overlooked to an extent. How much higher would I have really had him? Maybe a placing or two. I could have seen him in the top 3 personally, just off of the merit that his conditioning was just so good. I would have liked to see him compared more heavily to Ian, compared more heavily to John. And I think he really would have stood out. Again, you've got to acknowledge that the legs are a weak point for him, but even so, I mean, how much better could Maxx really have been at this show? He was like 100%. You know, Maxx has always kind of had this issue with his lower body, and I would argue Ian, he was better than Tampa. His color was better. I think he was fuller than he looked at Tampa. I think he was a little bit flat at Tampa, and just overall he was off at Tampa. I would say Ian was more, he looked like 85% to me. He wasn't 100% is my point. And I think that, you know, really Maxx came in as good as Maxx could possibly come in, and he wasn't really rewarded for it, because what else could Maxx really do differently or improve upon? His conditioning was about as good as it gets. And if you look back at the actual video of the show, I mean, seeing him pose on his own, and that was the key thing. I mean, when he's posing on his own, he obviously looks fantastic. He looks a lot better than when you put him next to these guys with bigger legs. Like Ian, like I said, Ian has much bigger legs than him, but posing on his own, he looks absolutely incredible, and he looks the best to me. I mean, he looked really good at the 2020 Arnold Classic. I think he was one of the better conditioned guys at the Arnold, and he wound up in 8th place at the Arnold Classic, so this isn't anything new or unique to the New York Pro. I just feel like he gets overlooked, and I think, you know, the question really becomes, at what point does conditioning stop being rewarded or stop being as important? Because I think when you've got a guy that's 100% and then several guys that are like 80, because let's be honest here, all these guys are fantastic bodybuilders. There's no doubt about it. Ian is a fantastic bodybuilder. John, Justin, Patrick, Hassan, all these guys are great, but let's be honest, none of the conditioning here was really outstanding, and that's just the fact of the matter. And I would say conditioning-wise, he was the most conditioned guy. Maxx was, and at the end of the day, I would just really like to have seen him get rewarded for that a little bit more than he was, because I do think some of these guys that placed ahead of him came in a little bit off, and I just would have liked to see Maxx get rewarded for conditioning to kind of stress the importance of conditioning at these shows, but maybe it's just not as important anymore. I know that Milos, his coach, put up a post that he was disappointed with the placing of Maxx and maybe felt that he was overlooked, and Milos ended up taking that down. But I definitely agree with that. I think Maxx looked incredible here. He's definitely everything you would have wanted to see. Great separated abs, vascularity all over. His legs were as good as he could possibly make them look. I mean, he's getting older. I don't think the size is going to be coming back at this point, but the conditioning that he had really brought that separation in the legs. And at the end of the day, I just feel that he was overlooked. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Maxx Charles was to me, he was the standout bodybuilder of this lineup. Best conditioning in my opinion. And he was the guy that I was most confused about the judging decision. Looking back at the live stream, I can understand Ian winning. I can understand why Justin moved into second. Originally, I had John and Ian going head-to-head watching prejudging. But then looking back at it, I could see why Justin moved up. He was tighter than John for sure. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you guys believe Maxx was overlooked? Do you agree with me here? Do you not agree? Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to this channel if you have not subscribed yet already. I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. And as always, Nick Strength and Power, signing out.